Hi, and welcome to a special edition of Montclair News Lab. I'm Bernice Degua. I'm here in New Orleans, Louisiana, where a group of reporters are here covering two topics very important to our generation: climate change and racial justice. Here, these two topics hit very close to home.
The pandemic on top of Ida, New Orleans did not need that.
The city that I love doesn't love me back the same way.
A lot of the violence we're seeing is a product of neglect.
No one was unaffected, either by death or financial loss.
It wasn't your average hurricane. We're going to be in a constant fight to battle the weather, whatever the conditions are.
Well, I don't wish this on anybody.
It's sad to live in a city where you're scared to go anywhere.
Today is the time to start planning for catastrophic events.
New Orleans, a city on the Mississippi River where frequent flooding, climate change, and rising water levels are threatening the neighborhoods, its people, and its culture.
New Orleans will again be underwater. The odds of another flood are increasing.
Every hour, Louisiana loses a football field worth of land to rising water levels. Mark Schleifstein is an environmental reporter for the New Orleans Advocate. He says Katrina, which happened 17 years ago, still haunts the city.
The key lesson for other cities to learn, looking at what happened to New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, is that today is the time to start planning for catastrophic events that are much more likely to occur.
Like over 1,000 people died. Like people drowned in their homes, people drowned in their attics.
Chelsea St. Juniors is from a long line of New Orleans natives. She saw the devastation of Katrina, where 200,000 New Orleans homes were destroyed, including her family's.
I do think the city is stuck in this cycle of like climate trauma, and I do think it's sustainable.
Almost 2 decades later, what's being done to prevent this from happening again? Charles Sutcliffe is the Chief Resilience Officer of the Louisiana Climate Initiative's task force. They recognize how much is at stake.
There are social implications for land loss, there are economic implications, there are infrastructure implications.
And infrastructure is important, like the $15 billion levee system that the Army Corps of Engineers has built since 2005. But Mark Schleifstein says, despite this investment, it's not enough.
Even though it is literally the best levee system in the world, it will be overtopped in the future by a major event. And that is a significant problem.
Sutcliffe says a multi-department effort by the state and federal government will deal with the significant problem.
I think where there's hope is that we have 15 years of experience of trying to grapple with the science of what's happening.
They look at the levee system as, well, gee, why is it here? Is it here to protect people? No, it's not. It's there to protect people's property, to protect their wealth.
Chelsea St. Juniors couldn't agree more. What concerns her is that the focus is on property and the tourist economy.
You end up with an economy that really does not support the people that make it what it is.
St. Juniors moved out of the city after Katrina, like 250,000 others. When she came back, she found a changed city, and an expensive one.
Everything's getting bought up by like out-of-towners, transplants, gentrifiers. They're buying up whole neighborhoods and turning them into short-term rentals like Airbnbs.
She believes what she calls the culture bearers of New Orleans need to be protected, not just the property.
You're not gonna have any culture left to make the money you want to make because nobody's gonna be able to afford to live here to do anything.
It's a balancing act. Protect the city and its people. For Montclair News Lab, I'm Gabby Taylor.
Throughout the country, people of color and the economically challenged bear the brunt of living in heavily polluted areas. New Orleans is no different. Our next story is about a group of residents here in Gordon Plaza and their fight against economic racism. Here's Kai Masiak.
Mayor Cantrell, cut the check. No time to waste. Not one more death.
The residents of Gordon Plaza, a housing development, have struggled for decades to be relocated out of their poisoned community.
All power to the people.
What may seem like a well-kept neighborhood used to be a former landfill. The city dumped household waste, construction debris, and ash from municipal incinerators. The Agriculture Street landfill, as it was known, closed in 1965. 65 homes predominantly marketed toward black families were built in the 70s. Longtime resident Jesse Perkins bought his first home there in 1988. It was the American dream for him and his mom. A year later, residents received EPA notices that there were contaminants in the soil.
I knew it was a landfill from my younger years. I used to play on we called it the dump when I was a kid. Never did I know that it was toxic.
Dr. Wilma Subra is a renowned environmental scientist who helped force the EPA to name Gordon Plaza a Superfund site in 1994. Testing revealed 150 toxic contaminants, 50 of which were cancer-causing.
You have acute health impacts like respiratory, skin rash, headaches, and then the chronic ones are like the cancers.
The CDC discovered that breast cancer rates were around 60% higher than average. From 1988 to 1997, 30 black women were diagnosed. One of these women was Jesse Perkins' neighbor, Ledwina Hurst.
I'm a breast cancer survivor, 5 years this year. I had 3 surgeries, 27 radiation treatments.
The EPA completed a cleanup project in 2001, but Dr. Subra says it wasn't enough.
EPA was in charge of the remediation, and they had specified only remove and replace 2 feet, and only in areas that you could get to. So in Garden Plaza, it equaled 10%.
I don't call it a cleanup. It was a cover-up. Greatest cover-up in Louisiana, as far as I'm concerned.
As we do this today, we offer to each other a source of inspiration.
Residents turned to political advocacy. Gordon Plaza Incorporated was formed, and Perkins became the vice president.
And we got one big mountain left to move, and we're going to move that mountain through our political activism, through our educating, agitating, and organizing. We're not toting guns. We don't need guns. These are our guns.
We're asking for a fully funded relocation because we want to be able to move out of here, buy a home, pay for our moving expenses, and not have incur any debt at all.
Tulane professor Lauren Godshall works with students to help residents sue the city. They lost in federal court repeatedly because she says the EPA's Superfund law is so broad. Their most recent loss was this year.
This was an unjust result. This traps these folks on the landfill until they're dead.
Meanwhile, earlier this year, the city council earmarked $35 million for Gordon Plaza residents. But so far, they haven't seen anything.
The city council has the authority to allocate these funds.
Residents continue to attend city council meetings and are largely ignored.
We fought for both the New Orleans master plan to speak to our concern.
Mr. Perkins, I want to hear your call to action, but to start to wrap up, please.
And Perkins says Mayor Cantrell is no help.
The mayor is about talk and no action. When she was reelected, she made mention of Garden Plaza.
I hear you. I'm listening to you and your outcry.
Residents are frustrated, and their fight isn't stopping now. Residents will continue to organize rallies and apply pressure to City Council until they have checks in their hands and can finally move out.
We're enslaved in our own homes. We're enslaved in this community, and that's not fair.
In another legal action, New Orleans Civil District Court recently ruled in favor of 5,000 residents tied to the property, entitling them to $75.3 million for emotional distress and property damage. However, the same question remains: when will the residents see the money?
We're people, black people, predominantly, who were discriminated against by the powers that be, the leaders of their city. We're just a community, a forgotten community.
Failed by the city, the EPA, and the legislative system, Gordon Plaza residents want justice.
The time is now.
For Montclair News Lab, this is Kaya Masiak.
One of the poorest neighborhoods in New Orleans is still struggling to keep up with the rest of the community. There are those who left and never looked back, but others who decided to stay and bring life back to the community. Giovanna Boggins has the story of the Lower Ninth Ward.
Burnell Coughlin served as a military police officer in Germany for 12 years. In 2005, he left and returned home to the Lower Ninth Ward in New Orleans.
Unfortunately, I came home just in time for Hurricane Katrina, and I lost everything, just like everybody else.
Katrina devastated the Lower Ninth Ward, leaving one of the poorest neighborhoods in the city a food desert.
You actually have to catch 3 city buses just to get a loaf of bread or a gallon of milk to feed your family. To me, that was an undue hardship, so I decided to do something about it.
Burnell used his life savings to purchase this building in the Lower Ninth, and with his own 2 hands, in 2014, he renovated what is known today as Burnell's Lower Ninth Ward Market. He built a barbershop, a store, and then a kitchen to prepare food.
This here is shrimp on bun dress, one of New Orleans' favorite sandwiches. Chef Anthony prepared this for me, and he's going to talk to us about what it's like being a chef here at Burnell's Lower Ninth Ward Market.
It's a family environment working here. It feels comfortable. I love it. It's an experience because you never know who might walk through the doors or who you might be able to help today.
Burnell not only caught local attention, but national attention too.
We are giving you 3 washers, 3 dryers. You just have to find the place for it.
And now we have the first and still only today laundromat in the Lower Ninth Ward.
When COVID-19 hit, Burnell noticed the pattern. Customers were not able to afford groceries, so he created store credit. He remembers the day an elderly woman could not afford her groceries.
She didn't have any money, and she just started crying. I came from around the cash register, and I wasn't supposed to do this, but I did. I gave her a hug, because right in the middle of a pandemic. And I told her, when you get the money, come on back.
For Burnell, it's not just about the money, it's about service.
I know that this is helping the community. So seeing the look on my customer faces, it makes it all worth it.
Simone Williams goes to Burnell's market twice a week, sometimes for groceries or just to say hi.
Burnell's personality, he is very optimistic, very upbeat, very outgoing. He's always busy. He'll give advice. He's just very, very helpful.
Simone moved into the Lower Ninth Ward in 2018.
A lot of the homeowners have either lost their property or are not keeping it up. It's used as dump sites. It's very sad to see the community still like this after so long, after Katrina.
A lot of people is not aware that New Orleans looks like this. We're only 10 minutes from the French Quarters. But you look around, it's like a third world country. I would love to see the Lower Ninth Ward catch up with the rest of the city. I have no regrets. I would do this all over again.
Food, haircuts, and laundry, and one man's effort to bring a neighborhood back together. For Montclair News Lab, I'm Giovanna Boggins.
Next up, there's a crime wave happening in New Orleans. Drew Mumich has the story.
This homicide is in the 5900 block of Veterans Memorial Boulevard, which is in Metairie, which is a suburb of New Orleans.
I followed breaking news reporter Missy Wilkinson from The Advocate to a homicide in the suburbs of New Orleans. Wilkinson said that there are many issues within the city.
I think our problems run so deep and go back so far, and it's really hard to pin the blame on one particular agency.
We arrived at the homicide scene. Sean Lee, 38 years old and a resident of New Orleans, was shot and killed. There I met with Jefferson Parish Sheriff Joseph Lapinto. He said that crime is down in his community, but not enough.
I wish I could prevent crime. I wish I could prevent this murder, but I don't know when it's going to happen, and neither does anybody else.
While the suburbs have seen a drop in crime, the city faces a difficult reality. As of this year, New Orleans is considered one of the deadliest cities in America, and Louisiana has consistently had one of the highest murder rates in the nation. Molly Miller with the Metropolitan Crime Commission said that they saw a drop in robberies at the beginning of the pandemic.
But we did not see any reduction in the homicide rates. We did not see much reduction in the shooting rate either. 2020 just spiked in murders. 2021 was even worse.
And I'm here because I'm tired of it, and I'm going to keep coming.
Community activists like Dr. Ashanta Wyatt, the founder of Mother to Mother, are striving to stop the rising crime rates in New Orleans.
We help with counseling services. We offer roundtables where we bring mothers together and they just use their tragedy to be able to speak to parents who have not yet lost children, but whose children may be gone awry. We've gone to the coroner's office to stand with parents as they identify children.
Mother to Mother does more than support. It's a platform for change.
Advocates like myself just trying to think of ways to impact crime and to curb violence.
As crime rates continue to surge, Dr. Wyatt, a mother herself, is questioning the government's actions.
How is it that these children, whose mothers can't even afford to pay the light bill and the water bill at the same time, how are they getting their hands on weapons that are meant to fight wars? I think the Office of Gun Violence needs to start doing some real thorough research to figure out the origin of these weapons.
I went to the New Orleans Office of Gun Violence Prevention and asked them what they are doing to help curb gun violence in the city. They explained that the city is just starting their first official government-funded study to identify the roots of this issue.
This is a public health approach. Let's identify those hotspot areas, identify where the shootings take place the most, and then put those peace ambassadors and allocate those services in those areas.
While the New Orleans Office of Gun Violence Prevention works on this study, murders in the city have continued to rise, and the New Orleans residents are dealing with the consequences. Residents like Teresa Castle, who lost her son in 2015. Castle remembers the phone call.
We came home about 8 o'clock. Then I got the phone call from my daughter.
Her daughter told her her son, Tremel Marshall, had been shot and killed.
He just was a good young man, never been in trouble. I'm sorry. He never been in trouble. He loved football. And girls, of course, but it was a good kid.
She has also lost her stepson and her grandson to gun violence. Her grandson was just 15 years old when he was gunned down in February of 2022.
The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restored my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the shadow of death, I will fear no evil.
For Montclair News Lab, I'm Drew Mumich.
This is Lake-Borgne Surge Barrier. It is one of the crucial storm protection systems surrounding New Orleans. It was built after Hurricane Katrina.
Hurricane Katrina, the monster storm bearing down on New Orleans.
Hurricane Katrina showed us our levee system is vulnerable.
This is what it's like just to get out the front door.
But Director of Operations Darren Austin says this new and improved system worked after Hurricane Ida.
Our system has now proven to some degree with Hurricane Ida and the performance for that storm that this kind of system can work in other areas.
The barrier works by closing all gates when word of a storm is approaching.
We typically are on a 96-hour schedule with that, meaning we'll close that gate 96 hours before a threat is expected to reach us.
The surge barrier, also known as the Great Wall of Louisiana, extends nearly 2 miles across the Gulf Intracoastal Waterway and the Mississippi River Gulf Outlet. It cost $1.8 billion to build and was built to last for years.
The system is actually designed to go to the level of protection that it's designed for up until 2057. We have no deficient areas in our system as it stands today.
But what about increasing deadly storms due to climate change?
Long term, I think we're going to be in a constant fight to battle the weather, whatever the conditions are that come through here. We're already working with the Corps and planning the system. What are we going to do in the future before 2057 gets here? Before these structures are outdated, what are the plans? What are we going to be able to do to keep the city safe and keep everything the way of life people expect to have?
The Lake-Borgne Surge Barrier, built to protect and save New Orleans from sinking underwater. For Montclair News Lab, I'm Keyshawn Reese.
Jazz music is the heart of New Orleans culture. After Katrina, a place was built that musicians can call home. Talon Lauriello takes us to Musicians Village.
Musicians live in these houses. This is a story about 3 of them. Margie Perez,
Sat in lonely room for so long.
Sula Spirit, and Fred Goodrich. Hurricane Katrina wiped out their homes and threatened the musical heart of New Orleans.
The house I was living in got about 6 feet of water. Since I was living on the bottom floor, I lost everything.
All the phone lines were down. I didn't know if my friend was, or if my friends were dead or alive.
Nobody knew what was going to happen to New Orleans, but I knew I needed to come back to help rebuild this city.
A lot of us couldn't afford to come back because gentrification began to happen right after Katrina. And that's why they thought of making the Musicians Village, which allowed all of us who may not have had a big, gigantic income to buy a house.
Habitat for Humanity started this project with Harry Connick Jr. and Branford Marsalis to bring musicians back to the city.
Instead of a down payment, you work 350 hours towards the building of your house and other people's houses. I can point to each house and say that I put in the windowsills in this house. I helped with the flooring on this house.
I helped frame every house on these 2 blocks.
After the storm, Fred was drowning in debt and thought he would never be able to own a house.
The dream of home ownership was gone. You know, my partner and I always hoped to do that. And here it was, not only get a house, but build it. And when the house was finished, I said, I'm gonna die in this house. Not soon, but I ain't never leaving.
Making music is a collaborative process, so putting artists in a community of musicians is a recipe for success.
My band is Freddie Blue and the Friendship Circle. It's very New Orleans, so and we love it.
I started doing porch jams at the pandemic. That's how I really launched the Coin Coin Band.
Sadly, it's not all progress. Hurricane Ida wrapped a tree in Fred's yard around a power line. He got on a ladder to cut it loose with a chainsaw.
All the commercials and stickers on trucks that says, "Don't ever do this." That was us, you know, on the ladder with the chainsaw. Oh! What could go wrong?
No matter what nature has in store, New Orleans music will never die. For Montclair News Lab, I'm Talon Lauriello.
Hurricane Ida had a devastating impact on Louisiana seafood production. One couple is trying to keep their business afloat with damaged boats and few workers. Louis Biondolo has the story.
St. Vincent Seafood Company, located in Golden Meadow, was started by Mr. Vincent, who came from Vietnam in the 1970s looking for a better life. Mr. Vincent retired, passing the business to his family, which Nyock says is the most important thing at St. Vincent's.
Family is key, and he made sure of that. My father-in-law made sure of that.
St. Vincent Seafood was untouched by Hurricane Katrina, but with Ida, it was a different story. Golden Meadow got hit hard. Up to 30% of boats were destroyed, and St. Vincent's is still not up and running.
We don't even have electricity to be able to fix anything right now.
All 6 of their boats were damaged, leaving the family scrambling.
So much work, but there's not enough people around to work.
Mr. Vincent came out of retirement to help with the cleanup. Why? Nyock says there's only one thing her father-in-law cares about.
He's doing it for us. He's not doing it for anyone else. He's like, you know, he's old. He doesn't need any of this.
And St. Vincent's isn't the only family business changing its plans.
It completely washed the building away. All that was left was the slab.
Right down the road, the Charity family owns a fishing charter company. And until Ida, it was smooth sailing for the Charities.
Cleanup takes a day. Rebuilding could take God knows how long.
Instead of rebuilding, Nick bought a raised store that survived the storm, right along the bayou.
This place is, you know, one of very few structures that took a Category 5 on the chin for 8 hours and survived.
And the whole family is involved in the renovation.
We do have our moments that we get into with each other, but it's working with family, that's what happens, you know.
Climate change is hitting the fishing industry hard, and for residents, it's an important part of the local economy. While the future seems unclear, the St. Vincent family is working to get back to where they were, and they are doing it together.
If you don't have family, then no one else is going to be around.
The Louisiana fishing industry has seen threats before, and many fishing companies are working to get back on their feet. For Montclair News Lab, I'm Louis Biondolillo.
From the bay to the dinner plate, then back to the bay. The life of a New Orleans oyster is getting a little more interesting thanks to this local coalition. I have more on this fascinating cycle.
In New Orleans, you can find oysters anywhere, but what happens to the shells when you're done? Let's start at Deanie's Seafood and Market. Chandra Shafisi runs the original Deanie's Seafood in Bucktown, Louisiana. She talked to us about her experience.
And this is one of the oldest seafood markets in Jefferson Parish.
Chandra's family bought the company from its original owners in 1982. They survived both major hurricanes.
The pandemic on top of Ida, New Orleans did not need that.
Hurricanes cause coastal erosion. Recycling oyster shells and putting them back in the bays is one way to help that. Chandra and Dini Seafood partnered with the Coalition to Restore Coastal Louisiana, or CRCL. They build more reefs with oyster shells that help produce, well, more oysters.
But the main reason, we're involved in this is just to keep this industry going and keep rebuilding these reefs so Louisiana has oysters for the next generation and so on.
After the shells make it through Dini's, they get picked up and delivered to Violet, Louisiana. Meet Dara Bash. Dara is the Oyster Shell Recycling Program Coordinator at the Coalition to Restore Coastal Louisiana. So far, they've recycled over 10 million pounds of shells. When showing us the Coalition's growing dumping site, Dara pointed out the left side of the mound, which was filled with newer shells, covered in oil, butter, and bacteria, which is harmful for the ocean.
That shell and then this shell is curing. The sun goes through a bleaching process where it will basically kill all of that bacteria. And then the shell, eventually, after 6 months, it will be entirely cured and there's no bacteria on this shell.
When the shells are entirely cured, they're placed in bags and on pallets to be delivered and dumped by volunteers into the water. These shells then release physical and chemical cues that attract other oyster larvae. But they don't just do that.
And we actually have found with data analysis that they can reduce the erosion of those marshes by 50%.
CRCL is currently partnered with 14 restaurants and have 2 public drop-off centers for citizens to drop off their leftover shells.
Can also participate in oyster shell recycling by dropping them off at those locations.
After the tour, Dara spoke about outreach and citizen motivation.
I find it to be really, really rewarding work and awesome to see that we can provide people with that opportunity to play a role in coastal preservation and restoration and really showing people like it's not too late for Louisiana.
And Chandra seems to think so too.
So I think the public have a knowledge that we're trying to do something, even if it's a little small part, to keep these beds regenerating every year, planting new beds, because if we don't keep this up, we're not going to have Louisiana oysters.
The city of New Orleans and its music are constantly evolving, but one local band is making it their mission to keep old school tunes alive in the birthplace of jazz. Ryan Breda has more.
Tuba Skinny is a traditional jazz street band that has taken its music from street performances to bars, concerts, and the studio.
The band's sound, roots, and soul are in New Orleans, but their fans are from out of state.
Gary Bertera, a Jacksonville, Florida resident, found the band on YouTube one day and has followed them ever since. The reason?
It's the traditional jazz music. You can't get it anywhere else. The music here is special. It's unique, and I love it.
Frank Kreisig, a fan of early jazz, is grateful the band keeps old school music alive.
We can't forget our past. You won't find a lot of kids in there because they're not interested in it, and it's a shame.
Todd Burdick, the tuba player of Tuba Skinny, echoes the band's love for the Big Easy's jazz sound.
All of us individually and collectively just love the music. Always been really drawn to New Orleans music and traditional jazz.
The band has been together since 2009 and has drawn closer together ever since.
Not as many groups stick together like us, so we have this kind of sound, I think, the cohesive sound because we just play together all the time.
Music is an economic driver of this city, and this band brings in the tourists. For Montclair News Lab, I'm Ryan Breda.
That's all for us here in New Orleans. As journalists, this experience has been incredibly impactful. We would like to thank the people of New Orleans and its gumbo, our professors Steve McCarthy and Dave Sanders, the School of Communication and Media, and the College of Arts at Montclair State. I'm Bernice Stegua. Thank you so much for watching.
Match him.
Hi, and welcome to a special edition of Montclair News Lab. I'm Bernice Stegua.